going to focus more on plowshares and the essays that we have published for DeWitt, by DeWitt in our journal. As we know, magazines come and go. One student researcher discovered that most new magazines have a lifespan of 3 years before they die. That's more than a gnat's, but it's less than a rat's. So how does an editor create a journal that lasts? What goes on behind the scenes? The discovery of talent showcasing it is, of course, what keeps the editors going. It's addictive. Like gambling, an editor bets on a writer, and if he or she hits the jackpot, so does the editor, however parasitically. Lovely. That's the heart of it. Or, as DeWitt Henry quotes Seamus Heaney as saying, on a higher level, quote from Seamus Heaney, "For all the activity and push of the enterprise, the aim of the poet and of poetry is finally to be of service, to ply the effort of the individual into the larger work of the community as a whole, and the spirit of our ages is sympathetic to that democratic urge." But with such idealism, we cannot survive without a dose of reality. As with most enterprises, political machinations lurk behind the scenes. So how did DeWitt Henry manage to co-found and direct with Peter O'Malley a journal like Plowshares that has lasted not 3 years, but 43? A journal, as we know, considered to be one of the top literary magazines in the country. In fact, Plowshares and DeWitt Henry have a place in the literary history of the U.S. Let's explore that history a bit. History shifts, of course. History depends on your point of view. The literary magazine of which I am editor, Solstice, a magazine of diverse voices, more than 3 years old, has published in separate issues 2 essays of DeWitt's, Perspectives and Shamrocks and Salad Days. In these memoirs, DeWitt discusses the generous spirit behind the rise of plowshares and also the spurts of Machiavellian intrigue that inevitably shadow successful ventures. We all know such struggles, not only on the so-called adult academic world of literary politics, but dating way back to elementary school. Bullies never die. But before delving into the intrigue, a few illustrious facts. Plowshares began in Cambridge Plow and Stars Pub. Does everyone know the facts of Plowshares in the background? Where the magazine's, so I'll skip over a little bit of this, where the magazine's co-founder, Peter O'Malley, owned a share. Peter O'Malley and DeWitt quickly sought to enlist Irish poets as the contributors. Derek Mann, Seamus Heaney, Thomas Kinsella, and so many more. There had been, as DeWitt writes, quote, decades of regular literary commerce between Harvard and Dublin in overlapping careers and social circles. Before long, the enterprise expanded. Robert Lowell and Frank Bedard became more involved. James Randall, the chairman of Emerson's writing program at the time, joined in. During these years, Seamus Heaney was a key volunteer for the magazine. In the very years, his friends began to refer to him as Famous Seamus. Seamus Heaney edited a transatlantic issue of Plowshares in the fall of '79. At that point, the first managing editor, Joyce Passaroff, came aboard. The sales expanded. These sales were no accident. Plowshares had worked to attract new readers. They got a grant. They set out to play, quote, and this is interesting, I think, for those of you who are in the Boston area, the cultural opposition of Irish Catholic and Boston College on the one side, and the Yankee Protestant and Harvard on the other. They mounted benefit reading series. They would get, for these black tie benefits, very famous writers, and sometimes make as much as $4,800. Sometimes they would break even. As for the name of the magazine, novelist Thomas Flanagan quipped that, quote, many of us probably have never touched a real plow, and then read from the Glenmore sonnets in Fieldwork, quote, vowels plowed into each other, opened ground, each verse returning like the plow turned round. Plowshares and DeWitt with it were on a roll. And yet he writes, our friends, patrons, readers all lamented and yet romanticized the element of sacrifice in perpetuating plowshares, how it operated always on a shoestring. And here we must think of the old, inexplicable, possibly masochistic appeal of romantic sacrifice. By 1984, when DeWitt was hired full-time at Emerson, his first and only full-paid job, he writes, the shoestring both for Peter O'Malley and for me had frayed to a filament. Life had caught up with them. They sought a sponsor for the magazine. Boston College, BU, and Emerson vied to take control. As we all know, Emerson succeeded in that venture. DeWitt and Peter dropped out of touch, and the magazine was turned to the trustees and estranged co-founders to decide with the power of attorney that Emerson would indeed take over the magazine. The involved parties were, as DeWitt writes, distressed by their involvement, yet all remained generously concerned and responsible. Finally, in 1990, with DeWitt's urging, the trustees accepted the Emerson proposal. His co-founder, Peter O'Malley, and DeWitt had no contact during this time. In 1990, Plowshares held another benefit. The magazine was on a roll, stable success, as Frank Conroy said, quote, it was a national treasure. And yet, even with its hard-fought triumphs, for DeWitt there were regrets. Later, in the spring of 1990, he attended a reading at Harvard for Seamus Haney and Dick Wilbur, and DeWitt writes, quote, I sat high up in the Saunders audience, and a sad, sad sense of deja vu and disassociation took me over. There was Peter in the front row. From my distance, there my friends, there the literary mob, there Ellen, there Peter and Ellen's son Gabriel. Our association of 20 years was over. And his last glimpse of his co-founder as DeWitt was walking along Newbury Street, quote, I caught sight of Peter having breakfast at a side table, a stylish bar and restaurant. He was reading Variety. I didn't stop, and he didn't see me. Part of honoring DeWitt today for me is to acknowledge the pain and suffering as well as the joys of giving birth to a journal like Plowshares. Is it possible for any of us to give birth without pain, without the baby growing into a being with a mind of its own creativity, its own rebelliousness, even at times being out of control? And in Perspectives, the second essay in our magazine, still available in our archives because we're an online journal, DeWitt writes of losing control of Plowshares as a result of academic politics. Of course, we have all heard Gore Vidal's famous line, academic politics are so brutal because the stakes are so low. But for those deeply involved, sometimes the stakes are high indeed. When DeWitt lost the chairmanship of his department, he also lost any real control over the journal he had founded decades ago. Perspectives is a remarkably honest, transparent, and lyrical exploration into the effects of this loss on his psyche. I highly recommend you reading this essay. I am going to read from the ending of it now to show you how DeWitt, in deeply moving prose, tells about giving birth to Plowshares, then raising this precocious, brilliant child, a child who leaves him to be an empty nester and to be confronted with his deepest self. There are no secrets in art, Forster writes, because we agree that art is an act of imagination. You paint your deepest emotions. In real life, however, daily life, the life of compacts, trusts, reliabilities, stark practice is wound and offensive. This may be the case, DeWitt writes, of Catholic confession and prayer in general. If there is a God who knows everything, whose understanding is infinite and forgiving, then we are not alone. We believe in divine intimacy. We make or dream a space of utter vulnerability beyond self-deceptions and working truths. I have believed too readily that life is a quest for some absolute perspective, some final clarification, that adulthood itself is always that next horizon, that higher and wider perspective from which everything becomes clear. That all experience, human experience, my experience, will overlap and coincide, and I will be with the old men on Yeats's lapis lazuli, looking down on the spectacle of human folly and ignorance and futures, and my glittering eyes will be gay. I think of the perspectives of Zen, the idea of reincarnation, of one life stage progressing in perspective to the next until one reaches nirvana. I think of the epiphany in fiction as speaking for our faith in endings, of John Keats and his 24 years old vision of stepping towards truth. But I don't know. This is DeWitt. This is not me saying that. This is DeWitt. But I don't know. At the end, we see perhaps what we wished we saw, just as we do each night in dreams. Perhaps the quest for perspective is life's make work. We search, we study, we dream. In small ways, we acquire small wisdoms, and yet we forget more than we remember. In my own life, how often I have willingly walked by hints and clues, and even by life's angels. I have chosen not to ask, not to see, not to know. And then it comes, your ending. It happens, swiftly as fact. This is happening, or slowly and in pain. 9 months, 9 weeks, your body claims your mind. Your body and your mind are one, failing, too tired to think, too weak. Yes, no, Rosebud. Who there can remember, imagine, or believe in here? So to conclude, it is for giving birth and raising his child and standing by that child even now, after that child has left home, that I give tribute to DeWitt Henry today, because we are all asked in some way to step away from what we have created, to say, okay, what next? Not a new magazine, perhaps, but a new book that you've written yourself. And after that book, we step back again, let that one go, and create another one. And so it goes. And so I acknowledge DeWitt, the editor, but also the writer, testifying to love and loss. Thank you.